Boy, it's really scary being unconscious. The things you imagine. I thought 2 little leprechauns and a red-headed giant were going through my pockets.
And this is the hall where my locker is.
Kelly, we've been at school for hours. Will we be going in a classroom today?
Yes, Connie, I'm coming to you from Fort Lauderdale, and we're rocking to celebrate summer's last hurrah, Labor Day weekend. I don't even know why we're on, because you'd have to be a real no-life.
Amidst the many sitcoms that passed across American television, few ever caused as much noise, as much controversy, and as much division as the story of one very unusual family. At first glance, it was a simple comedy, another 30 minutes of laughs and sarcasm tucked into prime time. But beneath the surface, it was something else entirely. A program that would ignite culture wars, spark national boycotts, and even alter the way television networks thought about families forever. Behind the laughter were secrets that the cast carried for years, stories of casting sessions filled with tension, moments of bitter conflict, and even tragedies that haunted the actors long after the cameras stopped rolling. After years of silence, the stars finally spoke out, revealing memories that could forever change the way you see the Bundys, a family that was never meant to be perfect, but one that became unforgettable. Ed O'Neill often looked back on that first audition with a mix of humor and disbelief. Walking into the room, he barely knew anyone. He wasn't sure what he was walking into or how he would fit in. The others were all but strangers to him, and most of them were still new to the industry. He was, as he later called himself, the one actor with a bit of name recognition, the one people knew they could count on. At that moment, he didn't realize that his weariness, his natural sigh, and even his posture would become part of television history. But long before that fateful audition, 2 men had already set the wheels in motion. Michael G. Moy and Ron. Levitt had grown tired of the glossy, idealized families that filled American living rooms throughout the 1980s. The Cosbys had created a cultural phenomenon, but they also set a bar for sitcom families that no one could reach. To Moy and Levitt, life wasn't so perfect. Families didn't sit around giving wise advice in perfectly decorated homes. Parents weren't flawless role models. Real life was messier, funnier, and sometimes darker. They wanted to show that side of America, the one that didn't appear in polished network scripts. Under the working title, Not the Cosbys, they crafted a script that turned everything inside out. Instead of loving, selfless parents, their family would be selfish, tired, sarcastic, and endlessly frustrated. Instead of heartwarming lessons, their show would rely on crude humor, sexual jokes, and raw banter. They weren't trying to imitate society's dream. They were trying to hold up a mirror, and surprisingly, Fox, then a fledgling network struggling to make its mark, embraced the idea completely. Where CBS, ABC, and NBC held tight to tradition, Fox wanted something loud, something bold, something that would make audiences stop and take notice. They didn't just allow Moy and Levitt to break the rules. They encouraged it. If the big 3 networks played it safe, Fox wanted to be dangerous. The show would become their shot at building an identity. Casting the Bundy family was the final, and perhaps the most important odd piece of the puzzle. And this is where fate seemed to take over. Ed O'Neill walked into his audition with little more than a shrug. He slumped into a chair, let out a tired sigh, and unknowingly embodied everything the character of Al Bundy would become. The creators were struck instantly. This wasn't an actor trying to play Al Bundy. This was Al Bundy. His indifference, his defeated posture, even the subtle humor in his mannerisms sold them on the spot. The role belonged to him. Next came Peggy Bundy. Katie Sagal had a vision of the character that went far beyond the words on the page. With her flaming red hair and provocatively tight clothes, she walked into her audition already living the part. She didn't just play the frustrated, teasing wife. She seemed to understand Peggy from the inside out. Katie herself later admitted that she instantly felt the rebellion in the character, a woman who mocked the very idea of being the perfect homemaker. Lazy, flirty, and quick with a biting remark, Peggy Bundy was born the moment Seagal stepped through the door. The children, however, proved more difficult to cast. At first, Kelly Bundy was played by actress Tina Casper. She had talent, but something was missing. The spark, the chemistry, the ability to balance the role's silliness with charm. Fox executives quickly realized it wasn't working. That's when 15-year-old Christina Applegate entered the picture. Despite her young age, Christina had a presence that immediately lit up the room. She was playful but sly, innocent but rebellious. Everything Kelly Bundy needed to be. When she joined the cast, the pieces began to click. Christina later recalled that while the atmosphere on set was filled with sarcasm and biting jokes, she felt instantly welcomed. The group became her second family, one that embraced her energy and helped her grow into the role. Bud Bundy was another story of trial and error. The role was originally given to Hunter Carson, but as with Kelly, the chemistry wasn't right. He didn't connect with the other actors in the way the creators needed. Then came a 12-year-old boy named David Faustino. Though nervous, David brought a spark that couldn't be ignored. Reading through the script, filled with jokes and innuendos that went far beyond what most kids his age would ever see on television, he felt both thrilled and intimidated. But his timing, his enthusiasm, and his ability to dive into the part convinced everyone he was the right fit. Bud Bundy was his, and with that, the core family was complete. But a sitcom like this needed more than just the Bundys. It needed a counterbalance, someone who could stand toe-to-toe with Al and Peggy's outrageous antics. Enter Amanda Bearse as Marcy Rhodes. She brought a sharpness to the role, a satirical bite that perfectly complemented the chaos of the Bundy household. Amanda would later recall how, in the early days, the cast carried a certain cynicism, unsure if this daring project would even last. But slowly, that cynicism gave way to camaraderie. Behind the sarcasm and the teasing, real friendships began to form. Katie Sagal often joked that Ed O'Neill made her laugh from the very first moment, while Christina Applegate said the group quickly became a little family, not just on camera but off-screen too. It was that chemistry, the effortless mix of sarcasm, humor, and affection, that made the Bundys feel so vivid. They weren't just characters on a page, they were alive, messy, and unforgettable. When the pilot was finally completed, Fox executives watched carefully. Their response was mixed. They praised the undeniable chemistry of the Bundy family but felt the supporting characters needed more punch. They called the show sharp, edgy, and shocking. And they were right. From the very beginning, it was clear that this sitcom would follow no conventional path. And it didn't take long for the public to find out. Just a few weeks into its run, the Bundys were already dividing audiences. Some loved the honesty, the crude humor, the refusal to play nice. Others were outraged, calling it offensive, vulgar, and unfit for family television. But the controversy only fueled the show's rise. And by 1989, one boycott campaign would take it from living rooms to the front lines of America's culture wars. By 1989, Married with Children had grown from a quirky new sitcom on a struggling network to a household name, and not always for the reasons Fox expected. The show had only been on the air for 2 years when it suddenly became the center of one of television's most heated controversies. What triggered the storm wasn't a shocking finale, a celebrity cameo, or even a ratings stunt. It was a single episode, one that ignited a firestorm across America and changed the way people looked at the show forever. The episode in question was titled, "Her Cups Runneth Over." At first glance, it was just another cheeky Bundy adventure. Al and Steve, the neighbor, sneaking into a lingerie store in search of a discontinued bra-style Peggy loved. But to one viewer in suburban Michigan, it wasn't just cheeky. It was offensive. That viewer, Terry Racolta, wasn't just a housewife. She was also the sister-in-law of future presidential candidate Mitt Romney, and she had connections in politics and business that gave her voice weight. Outraged by what she saw as vulgar and inappropriate content, she launched a public crusade against the show. Raccolta called for advertisers to pull their sponsorship, urging companies to stop funding what she described as filth being beamed into American homes. Her campaign gained traction quickly, with national news outlets covering the story, parents' groups joining the cause, and companies like Coca-Cola suddenly caught in the middle. Within weeks, the boycott was national news. The controversy made Married with Children a lightning rod in the ongoing debate about what was acceptable on television. For Fox, though, the outrage became an unexpected gift. Instead of crushing the controversy catapulted it into the spotlight. Ratings jumped as curious viewers tuned in to see what all the fuss was about. People who had never heard of the Bundys suddenly wanted to see the sitcom that was too offensive for some households. The boycott gave Married with Children something priceless: free publicity. Ed O'Neill later admitted that the cast could feel the shift almost overnight. What had started as a scrappy little sitcom was suddenly a national talking point. He remembered fans approaching him on the street, half laughing, half whispering about the scandal. Some praised the show for being fearless, while others scolded him as though he had personally brought shame to American families. But O'Neill, true to Christina Applegate, still just a teenager at the time, was caught in a far more complicated position. On one hand, she was enjoying the breakout success of playing Kelly Bundy, a character who quickly became a fan favorite for her comic timing and mischievous charm. On the other hand, she was also a young girl navigating the pressures of sudden fame, intense media attention, and a role that often required her to play up her sexuality on screen. Looking back years later, Christina confessed that it was sometimes overwhelming. The laughter from the audience was real, but so was the pressure she carried. David Faustino, as Bud Bundy, faced his own share of challenges. Playing the youngest member of the family, he was surrounded by scripts filled with jokes that pushed boundaries, many of which he was too young to fully understand at the time. But he quickly adapted, finding his rhythm as the character who was constantly overlooked, mocked, and teased, both by his family and by life itself. David later reflected that Bud's struggles mirrored his own in some ways. Always trying to prove himself, always fighting to stand out. Amanda Bears, who played Marcy, often joked that she was both the voice of reason and the voice of outrage within the show. As the Bundys' neighbor, her character regularly called out their behavior, acting as a counterweight to their chaos. But off-screen, Amanda also became an important stabilizing force. While the rest of the cast leaned into sarcasm and teasing, she often offered perspective, reminding them of the bigger picture, that they were breaking new ground in television, whether they realized it or not. The boycott itself eventually faded, but the shadow it cast lingered for years. It marked Married with Children as a show that thrived on controversy, a sitcom that didn't just entertain, but provoked. For Fox, that was exactly what they needed. The show gave the young network an identity, separating it from the safer, family-oriented programming of its competitors. Without the Bundys, Fox might never have found the rebellious, edgy brand that later gave birth to hits like The Simpsons and The X-Files. Behind the scenes, though, the cast was living their own, complex stories. Fame came quickly, but it wasn't always kind. Christina Applegate, for instance, struggled with being typecast as the dumb blonde long after the show ended. She admitted that while Kelly Bundy made her a star, it also made it harder for Hollywood to see her as anything else. Katie Sagal, meanwhile, found herself battling personal demons, including addiction, even as her character Peggy became one of television's most iconic wives. Ed O'Neill handled his fame differently. While Al Bundy became a cultural symbol, the grumpy shoe salesman who never caught a break, Ed himself kept a low profile off-screen. He often avoided the Hollywood party scene, preferring a quieter life. Still, he couldn't escape Al, Bundy's shadow. Even years later, people would shout, "Hey, Al," at him on the street, reminding him that some characters are too powerful to ever leave behind. The cast as a whole, though, remained united by the bond they had built on set. Through the ups and downs, the controversies, and the fame, they found comfort in knowing they had been part of something bigger than themselves, a show that rewrote the rules of television. And yet the story of Married with Children wasn't all laughs and triumphs. Behind the humor were real struggles, losses, and moments of pain that cast members would only reveal much later. Their confessions showed that while the Bundys were fictional, the emotions behind the show were anything but. As the seasons rolled on, Married with Children cemented its place as one of the most talked-about shows on television. But while the Bundys were making America laugh, the reality for the actors was far more complicated. Success had come quickly, but with it came an unrelenting spotlight, personal battles, and the kind of pressures no one had been prepared for. For Christina Applegate, the sudden leap from a relatively unknown teenager to a national celebrity was overwhelming. Playing Kelly Bundy made her one of the most recognizable young actresses in the country, but the fame was double-edged. While audiences adored her comic timing and the way she delivered Kelly's outrageous one-liners, Christina herself often felt boxed in by the role. The writers leaned heavily into Kelly's dumb blonde persona, a caricature that drew laughs but left Christina uneasy. Years later, she admitted that she sometimes felt reduced to the punchline, as though her real talent was being overshadowed by the stereotype. Off-screen, she fought hard to prove she was more than the character that made her famous. Meanwhile, David Faustino's story was just as complex. Bud Bundy was written as the underdog, the kid who never quite measured up, constantly teased by his sister and overlooked by his parents. Audiences laughed at Bud's misfortunes, but for David, playing the role meant growing up under a microscope. He entered the show as a boy and left it as a man, all in front of a national audience. While other kids his age had the freedom to make mistakes in private, David's awkward years were immortalized on television. He later confessed that living under that kind of scrutiny wasn't easy, and at times he struggled with his identity. Outside of the show, Katie Sagal carried a different kind of weight. On screen, Peggy Bundy was vibrant, sarcastic, and larger than life. But off-screen, Katie was quietly battling demons. During the height of the show's success, she struggled with addiction, a fight she kept hidden from much of the public. At the same time, she endured personal tragedy, including the devastating loss of her first child. Balancing her private pain with the demands of playing one of television's most memorable characters took a toll, but Katie pushed forward. In later interviews, she admitted that Peggy Bundy had, in some ways, been her escape, a role that allowed her to channel her energy and survive difficult years. Ed O'Neill, too, found himself navigating the tricky balance between character and self. Al Bundy was a phenomenon, instantly recognizable, endlessly quoted, and forever tied to Ed's face. Fans adored Al, but they didn't always separate the man from the role. Ed would often recount how strangers would approach him on the street, shouting, "Hey, Al!" or asking about shoe sizes as though he were still behind the counter of the shoe store. At first, he took it in stride, laughing at the idea that a single role could leave such a permanent mark. But over time, he realized that Al Bundy wasn't just a character. He was a cultural icon. The weight of that identity followed Ed for years, even as he pursued other roles. Amanda Bearse, meanwhile, had her own groundbreaking journey. While playing Marcy Rhodes on the show, Amanda made history in her personal life by coming out as gay, one of the few network television stars to do so publicly in the early 1990s. At a time when Hollywood still kept such topics behind closed doors, Amanda's decision was both brave and risky. Some in the industry warned her that it might hurt her career, but she refused to hide. Looking back, she said that the courage to be herself came in part from the rebellious spirit of Married with Children. The show had always pushed boundaries, and in her own way, Amanda did the same. The chemistry of the cast remained one of the show's strongest elements. Despite the challenges each actor faced, there was an undeniable connection between them that kept the series alive. On set, sarcasm was the language everyone spoke. The jokes often flew faster behind the cameras than they did in front of them. Katie Sagal once recalled how Ed O'Neill could crack her up with a single glance, while Christina Applegate described the cast as her second family. That off-screen bond translated into the humor and energy that audiences felt each week, making the Bundys feel real, despite their outrageous antics. Yet the show's success also carried a price. The longer it ran, the more criticism it attracted. Some parents' groups never forgave it for pushing boundaries. Critics accused it of lowering the standards of television, while defenders argued that it was simply holding a mirror up to society. The irony, of course, was that both sides were right. The Bundys were outrageous, crude, and shocking, but they were also painfully familiar. In their flaws, audiences recognized their own frustrations. By the early 1990s, Married with Children was no longer just a sitcom. It was a cultural touchstone, a show that dared to be different at a time when networks thrived on sameness. It gave Fox the identity it needed and forced the industry to rethink what television could be. But for the cast, the journey was far from simple. The fame, the controversies, and the personal struggles all collided in ways that no script could have predicted. And as the years went on, the Bundys' story, both on-screen and behind the scenes, only grew more complicated. The more the show grew, the more the behind-the-scenes tensions became part of its fabric. While the cast bonded, the constant pressure of pushing boundaries sometimes created heated debates about just how far they could go. Katie Sagal remembered moments when even she questioned certain scripts, not because she didn't trust the creators, but because she wondered how audiences would react. Yet, every time the lines were crossed, it was those very moments that sparked the most laughter and cemented the Bundys as television's most unpredictable family. Ed O'Neill often admitted that playing Al Bundy sometimes felt like carrying